Okay, this video is about a do-it-yourself homemade bubble machine. It has 5 main components. I'll talk about each one briefly as I put it together. You can see the box is made out of 1/4 inch, actually 7/32 plexiglass. I have a neighbor that had some of this left over and he was nice enough to give it to me. Thanks, Walt. I put a screen in the back here because there's a fan that'll sit here and I wanted to keep little fingers out of there, and this is actually nylon string that I put in there. This is a 3D printed part. Here's my little drain hole back here. You can see there's a little bearing here that I glued in place that holds a rod. Over here is the 16 RPM motor that turns the bubble rotor. So 16 RPMs is relatively slow. If you look inside here, you'd see lots of different gears. This sits in here. It has just a couple screws to put it together. 1, 2, and a tool. Nice thing about plexiglass is that you can drill it and tap it as needed. I actually had printed a template to locate these screw holes as well as the one on the opposing side so that everything lined up correctly. And the next thing up is this nice 3D printed rotor. I printed it in 2 pieces. It was printed this way first. A little tricky to make these pieces because you're printing effectively in free space, but it didn't print too poorly. And then I printed obviously the second half. You probably can't tell too well, but there's some set screws in here that I use to hold on to the motor, and that basically slips onto the motor right here. And I have these 2 brass rods. The 16 inch rod goes all the way through, actually goes all the way through into the motor shaft, and this guy sits on the outside, and this bigger one fits tight in the bearing over here. This is a 4mm inside diameter bearing. It turns out 5/32 outside diameter brass. It's readily available in the United States. Fits a 4mm bearing. And again, I just tighten those set screws here. The other thing I want to talk about is the third component would be the fan. This is a brushless motor that you would use in a small RC airplane. Again, this was another propeller that I had from a small flying wing from years ago. This sits on the top. Again, I have a nice 3D printed handle here. And the electronics are the last part. This is a speed controller, again, that would be in a small RC car or airplane, something like that. It's a brushless speed controller. And this microcontroller here provides the pulses to the speed controller, and this is effectively a throttle control. So the microcontroller senses the position of this potentiometer and decides what pulses to put to the speed controller to control the fan speed. So that just sits in the back here. One thing I might mention is that it's a little hard to see, but I provided some up thrust in the propeller to try to loft the bubbles higher, and there's actually a little bit of left thrust because you get a propeller effect. If you know anything about RC stuff or airplanes in general, you have what they call a P effect. So I tried to compensate for that by putting a 5 degrees of, in this case, left thrust. So that goes in here, and there's 5 screws that'll hold this on the top. I'll put those in later, and we'll come back and blow some bubbles. Alright, I've got the machine fully assembled. I put some bubble juice in it. And then we're going to turn it on. It's battery operated. This is a 3-cell LiPo. Again, all these plastic pieces you see, the handle, everything is all 3D printed. And you can see we're getting some bubbles here. And you can adjust the throttle to get maximum bubble performance. And I'll widen out here a little bit so we can see all these bubbles. It's blowing bubbles. They're actually relatively large compared to some other bubble machines I've seen. So it's a bubble machine. Thanks for watching. Bye.